Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Very warm welcome to you all today, and today we're going to be looking at media, social media, manipulation, mind control, perception management, and our guest will be Neil Saunders, who was one of Art Bell's recent guests before his departure. So before we talk about today's main topic, let me just tell you a little bit about our show, Truth Sentinel. We do weekly shows covering topics connected to mysteries, conspiracies, psychology, philosophy, political corruption, cover-ups, world events, news, paranormal, and a lot more. So we've covered topics in the past like logical thinking, the psychology of fear, cryptozoology, MH370 and missing planes, honor killings, Egyptian pyramids, human head transplants. We've got an interview with Valery Spiridonov, the world's first head transplant donor. You can find some of those on YouTube if you look for Truth Sentinel with Scott. Recent guests have been CNN's Jeff Wise, Sean Stone, son of Oliver Stone, refugee activist Gabriela Andreevska, Jasvinder Singera, a campaigner against honor killings and forced marriages. We've had L.A. Marzulli, Brian Forster, Gareth Icke, Sheila Zielinski, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, Douglas Dietrich, Tony Ortega, Karen de la Carriere, Scientology whistleblower. We did episodes on cults as well. We had Hollywood actor Stephen Shellen. So there's lots of past episodes you can find on YouTube, but I hope that you'll enjoy listening to our latest episodes as well. We're a traveling podcast, so we sometimes try and relate episodes to our location. I've been moving around from the UK to Ukraine, Israel, Egypt and Thailand, and many of the people we chat to are based in different countries as well, like Portugal and Kazakhstan and the USA. There's no constraints on what we can talk about, and we love to hear from you as well, so you can always leave voicemails at www.truthsentinel.co.uk and give us ideas on topics and guests, and we can respond to you. There's also a chat room there, so let us know what you think about the comments we've made. You can agree or disagree. And thanks to people listening on YouTube and on digital networks. And quick shout out to trutht-shirts.com. There's a special code for Truth Sentinel listeners, Truth1. You can buy conspiracy-related t-shirts from www.trutht-shirts.com, and you get a 10% discount with the code Truth1, and we get a small donation as well, so it helps fund us. Anyway, let's get on with today's show. So today we're going to talk about manipulation, and later we'll be going over to speak to our guest Neil Saunders. First of all, let's go over to Anthony Kay, our academic researcher, currently living in Almaty, Kazakhstan, 1,500 meters above sea level, near the highest ice rink in the world, and almost at the foothills of the Himalayas. So I believe you were going to start off by talking about misleading headlines, Anthony.
That's right, Scott. But before I do, I just want to propose something. I was doing a bit of reading about this today, and it suddenly occurred to me that we should have a Truth Sentinel drinking game.
You know I'd be up for that any time.
I've come up with 2 rules that I think we can start off with and maybe add more as we go. First rule is anytime I say, actually, there's been quite a bit of research into this, take a drink. And anytime you say, yes, indeed, take a drink.
Indeed,
how does that sound?
Indeed, that's a good idea.
Okay, so with that in mind, about the issue of misleading headlines, there has been quite a bit of research into this. One series of studies in particular caught my eye. There's a researcher at the University of Western Australia called Ulrich Ecker, and Ecker investigated what he called misinformation effects. One of them was the effect of misleading headlines. So in one of his studies, he took a newspaper piece about burglary. And the piece talked about how there had been an overall downward trend in burglary, but there'd been a recent spike which had sort of bucked the trend. And he gave it to 2 groups of people, but he just changed the headline. So one group of people had the article with the headline of burglary on the rise, or burglary spikes or something like that. Another group of people had the article with the headline downward trend in burglary. And what he found was that the people who got the headline about the downward trend, after they read the article, they found it more difficult to remember details of the sudden spike. And the people who got the headline about the sudden spike found it more difficult to remember details about the downward trend. So other researchers have looked into this too, and there is a cognitive basis to it. Basically, your brain is taking in every piece of information and trying to use it to cut down on the necessary cognitive processing to get to the truth. So if you see a big, bold headline, your brain says, all right, great, we've got the general gist now, and anything that kind of contradicts that general gist is more difficult to process.
It sounds a bit like topic sentences in articles. Students of English are often taught to read the first sentence of a paragraph, the topic sentence, to get a gist of the meaning of the whole paragraph to aid them in comprehension questions.
Most books on academic writing give that advice, or academic reading, and I have found that it's often not the best advice, probably for similar reasons to this. Yeah. So, these headlines definitely, I mean, the research studies have found that if you just read the headlines, then the headlines influence your view. But they've also found that even if you read on, the headlines still have an undue influence. Now, I think a lot of the time headlines are misleading just because of, I don't know, poor copywriting, or the need to kind of put the sensational claim at the front of the piece and then go into the boring details later.
Yeah, there's a lot of articles with sensational headlines that draw you in because it sounds incredible, and then you find out that the headline's actually nothing to do with the story.
Yeah, I know, and I think this is sometimes just, a kind of somewhat objectionable journalistic technique, but at other times I think it goes a little deeper. I think there is a strategy among some political organizations and media organizations of headline and retraction. So you make a claim, you get the big headline, and then much later you retract it. And when you do that, the retraction never gets as much publicity as the original striking headline. So, you've got X million people who only saw the headline, not the retraction. Sometimes this is a deliberate strategy. You go out there with the misleading claim, then you retract it, then you spin the retraction, and it all works for you. So if you can come up with the big claim, no matter how ludicrous it is, like, a lot of people will go away believing it, and even those who don't will be led away from the main issue of you lied and into another issue which suits your purposes.
Yeah, and sometimes it might just be by accident as well. I mean, there was that team of scientists at the South Pole who said they discovered evidence of gravitational ripples caused by the Big Bang, not to be confused with the more recent discovery of gravitational ripples regarding the collision of black holes. Later on, it was found just to be dust, but the main stories are still up there. Everyone's still reading them, and I think there's a lot of people that believe that was found, the evidence, but actually it wasn't. The retractions aren't so widely distributed.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and it's the nature of the beast to some extent. But before we hand over to Neil, just one thing I wanted to say. Out of all of these studies that I mentioned by Ecker and others, there was one positive thing that emerged. If people are informed about these misinformation effects, like the tendency of some of the media to use misleading headlines, the studies found that if people learn about these and are aware of these, then it kind of reduces the impact. So in other words, if you know how misleading headlines can affect people, you are not affected. Which is why I think the fact-checking movement that we've seen spring up in the last 5 years or so, although there are obviously bogus fact-checking sites, the fact-checking movement and to some degree the truth movement are a good thing in this way, because they are critical of media practices, so they are educating us how these things can lead us astray, don't you think?
I agree to a certain point, but I do think there are some sites out there which are over-skeptical and biased as well, so you have to be careful with the fact-checking sites.
Yeah, I would agree, and some of them also have political motivations behind them as well. But still, overall, a positive development, I think.
Indeed. That's just for anyone playing that drinking game. Let's go over now to Neil Saunders, who many listeners will know from his interview with Art Bell on Dark Matter Digital Network. Neil's going to touch on some of the topics we've been talking about, plus a lot more to do with mind control, manipulation, brainwashing, and perception management. We know the CIA conducted mind control experiments in the past, so we shouldn't be surprised if they still continue. A good person to talk to about these matters is Neil Saunders, who has a background in film studies, psychology, media, mind control and hypnotherapy. He can often be heard on Rich Planet TV, a great show with Richard D. Hall. So welcome to Truth Sentinel, Neil. Just a general question to start with. Do you think the media control people's opinions via TV, film and newspapers, like directly control it? Are governments, CIA, MI5 and other agencies really in tight control of the media, or do they just have a little bit of influence?
That's quite a big question. I mean, on a very sort of low level, yes, the media controls it because it dictates what stories get told and what stories don't get told, and that can be manipulated through a number of ways, mostly through the practice of what is known as journalism at the minute, which is basically the fact that there's surprisingly, because of the nature of rolling news, there's surprisingly few sources for news. If you actually look into it, majority of news agencies will take their stories from the news wires like AP and such like that, and just basically repeat them verbatim without having time to check facts and having time to sort of test the veracity of statements and such like that, because you've got this culture of rolling news. So in that sense, certainly they can. In a broader sense, I suppose there's always political and what could be termed corporate allegiances. Like, for example, you see Sky News or Fox News have got a particularly right-wing bent, and certainly would favour certain stories and disregard other stories. And you also would see that not only on a sort of political level, but because of the, say, shareholder stock interests of people that say that actually own these media outlets, they wouldn't heavily promote a story that would affect another area of their business, or they would spin it in a particular way. And then you come into the area of propaganda, and a lot of people would think that we have an independent media, we have bodies supposedly to maintain independence in media, and fairness and accuracy in reporting, all these sorts of things. So how could this happen? But if you go back to sort of statements, even, I mean, these are quite old statements, but people within the CIA were saying, you don't need to control journalists per se, because you can control CNN on a board level, or Time Warner on a board level, by having people in your pocket, either through friendships, associations, blackmail, favourable business interests, or any of that sort of thing. And then obviously you get the embedding of reporters as well. I mean, one of the most famous examples was exposed by a Dutch news. I may be butchering that, I'm afraid, but I believe it's TROUW. And basically they exposed that during the Kosovo war, during that particular conflict, the CIA were embedding propaganda agents in CNN, over 1,500, and their job was to directly influence news. And basically people pointed out that, well, what is the difference between that and favourable propaganda for your foreign policy? And, well, they didn't really have an answer for that.
It must be so easy to release propaganda stories. And you mentioned that the news is often not checked. I mean, I saw today and yesterday, I think, about the ISIS fighter who's supposed to have killed his own mother. Now, he may well have done, and that would, it'd be pretty terrible. But the first story I read when it first came out was they actually admitted that it hadn't been checked. It was just like an agency had released it, hadn't been checked. But then it's just everywhere now that this ISIS fighter's killed his own mother. And so when I was asking about whether the media control people's opinions, I think there's be a lot of people now down the pub will say, "Oh, did you hear about that guy? Killed his own mother." It just seems to me so easy. It must be so easy if there are agencies trying to control public opinion. They just release these stories all the time because they don't have to be checked.
Well, a lot of the time, the content of the story won't necessarily match the headline. The headline will be sort of very hyperbolic and very, we live in the era of clickbait, where you've got to draw in customers, and a lot of it is online and such like that. So people are, drawn to that particular type of excitement. And you'll get there'll be certain words within the body of the text. Basically, certain reports suggest initial reports suggest, an unnamed eyewitness, and you can start to decode that perhaps this isn't as accurate a story as it's made out to be, and so in a sense what they're doing is they're covering their back by the use of such language. Basically, you can say, oh, we never actually said that. That's not actually what we said. A lot of the time you'll get stuff like, particularly when it's in court cases, they'll say like, suspect strangled his brother in a fit of rage or something like that, and you go, oh wow, that's outrageous. And you read the story and it'll say lawyers for the prosecution claimed that blah 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 blah. This was heavily refuted by the defense, but what you actually go away with is the headline. I mean, we there's so much information at the minute, just flying around, that I think it's easy for people to search out answers that fit preconceived beliefs and such like that, and make their day easier, or if you want to boil it down to sort of like psychological benefits and such like that.
Yeah, everyone's trying to make viral videos and things like that, and if you want,
Yeah.
if you're sort of in the sort of alternative media, even, you have to sort of wonder whether you going to play the same tricks. I mean, I released a video because I wanted to get more hits, and I put, "You'll never guess what this tortoise does next," and of course it did nothing. Basically, I'm kind of making fun of the whole concept, there's all these videos saying, 10 scary things this guy does, and number 4 will frighten you to
Blow
death.
your mind. Yeah.
There's loads of those kind of formulaic kind of viral videos going around. Who do you think's responsible for them?
Well, I mean, initially they were a good idea, weren't they? This is the problem though with any medium, is that things just get saturated and people go. It's easier to replicate something that's shown success in the past rather than actually come up with a new and innovative idea. And there's nothing wrong necessarily with doing that, to be quite honest. You know what I mean? Like, you can obviously learn from it. There's techniques this is why things are called tried and tested, but it depends how well you do it. Do you know what I mean? There's a difference between being influenced and just lifting something. So, but again, I think it's because we're in a weird time actually. I think people are a bit close to it really, but the internet's relatively new, still. I mean, certainly social media and YouTube and such like that is still relatively new as a medium, so it gives people this out there. And what's strange is you've got different swathes of society. Some people who are like, wow, this is a new thing, this is a new way that I can get my ideas out there, or connect with people or whatever. And then you've got a lot of people who the norm, teenagers, kids, stuff like that. I imagine there's a certain degree of people that have never not been on Facebook or Twitter or whatever that, or YouTube. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I almost myself, I can't remember what I did before the internet. Like, what the hell did I do? Because I probably spend too long on it myself now. Yeah, so I guess we filled our days with doing other things, watching TV, I suppose. TV used to be the internet, really.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's one of the weird things about a lot of people on the internet. You say, I don't watch the television anymore. Okay, fine, that's fair enough. But who's to say that you're more discerning in your tastes with your YouTube videos or the articles that you read or whatever? There's nothing wrong with being on social media. There's nothing wrong with watching the television. You just don't let it become the be-all and end-all of your existence. Absolutely. Basically.
Moving on to one of your main specialities, and something I mentioned in the intro about the CIA conducting mind control experiments in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think are the architects of mind control these days? Is it still the CIA? Are there other agencies? Is there anything similar to MKUltra still going on? I mean, Bill Clinton apologized for it, didn't he, in the past?
Well, in the 1990s, he did apologize for radiation tests that were taking place in the late 70s. And despite the fact that they were supposed to have got rid of all the biological poisons at Fort Detrick, keeping desperately war crime illegal blowfish poison and stuff like that, and this was discovered in again the late 70s and stuff like that. But it took 25 years for all the documents to come out from MKUltra, all the available documents from MKUltra, and there's nothing. There's intriguing glimpses and stuff like that, but there's huge portions missing basically. So it would be very, very difficult to say. There's loads of aspects. It depends again what you want to describe as mind control, really. If you're talking about, say, Manchurian candidates and such like that, who would know? The technology certainly exists to create them and to make people act in bizarre ways that are, against their own sort of better judgment. And against their own personal safety and such like that, and you would imagine that the people would be the same people who have this technology, elements of intelligence agencies and stuff like that. But you also see intelligence agencies forays into things like advertising, into things like television and movies to promote, to subtly promote agendas, like something as straightforward as the Iron Man films or the Transformers films or whatever. They're heavily sponsored by the military. They exchange equipment and such like that. In exchange, the film makes the military look cool, and so you could make that argument that would be a degree of mind control. Foreign policy dictates mind control, because you've got to know who the enemy is. You've got to justify incursions into foreign territories. You've got to justify whatever it is that you're trying to sort of promote. You've also got to make people actually genuinely believe that the entire narrative that's being told to you about terrorist organizations and terrorist attacks is 100% accurate. As far as is being told to you, which personally I don't believe. So there is a whole degree of what could be considered mind control, basically.
Yeah, and talking of terrorism and warfare, what could you explain a bit what psychotronic warfare is?
Well, psychotronics is basically it's an umbrella term for the use of electronic brain interfering devices, so essentially mind control by the use of implants or ray guns or other sort of nefarious devices that beam things into your head. And there's a whole sort of range of different things, just I mean, implants, for example, which was probably sort of one of the first things that they were looking at. I mean, it was a Spanish doctor called Jose Delgado, and a lot of people have probably seen the footage, or you can find on YouTube the footage of him using a remote control to stop a charging bull in its tracks. And what he did was, it was relatively crude. He basically, these implants called stymosevers, well, relatively crude. I couldn't do it, but relatively crude in comparison to some of the latest technology. What these implants called stymosevers did was they literally just caused an electronic impulse, so it would directly affect muscle response. So it would freeze up the actual, physically freeze up the bull and stop it from moving, basically, or freeze up certain muscles, which would in turn cause the bull to stop in its tracks. Later experiments with these stymosevers, according to Delgado and the other doctors involved, got so far as to be able to sort of perceive what people were seeing and what people were thinking. He said that they could interrupt somatic functions and thought process. It could make people basically, he could turn people into robots, is essentially what he said. He did like push button robots, and he could manipulate their behavior willy-nilly.
That sounds pretty scary. I mean,
yeah.
Are there devices then that could actually control people's emotions and make them become violent, do you think?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, there's an experiment in the late, I think it was the early 60s actually, that was conducted. Basically what was happening was in the Moscow embassy, the American embassy in Moscow, they discovered that the Russian Secret Service or intelligence agencies or some degree of the military or whatever was actually bombarding the office of the ambassador with microwaves in order to test the results, see what would happen. And the results was that they basically slowly became very, very ill and later died of illnesses that were attributed to radiation poisoning. And now the American government basically found out about this, and rather than tell the staff or help them out or anything like that, they decided that what we'll do is we'll just correlate our own results and see if we can find anything useful for this. And this became known as Project Pandora. And this was basically taken back to America and expanded by a doctor called Ross Addy. Now, one of the most terrifying things that he discovered was that brainwaves or brains they have sort of very similar patterns for emotions. Like, have you ever seen one of those like on Casualty or whatever? You know, the sort of mind wave things, or a Frankenstein film. They're called an EEG meter, or an electroencephalograph, or I'm butchering that again. But basically, they make like a wave pattern, and when you're thinking certain things, that a certain particular type of wave pattern goes on. There's one for, say, rage, there's one for joy, there's one for love, and he discovered that if you took the say the pattern for rage, and you sort of piggybacked it onto a particular type of microwave beam, and then fired this directly into the brain, it sort of short circuited the brain, whereby the brain recognized this signal and couldn't tell that it wasn't organic, so it immediately responded as if this signal was to be played out. And so you would immediately feel the white hot rage, or the the bitter terror, or the incredible sadness, or whatever. And there's no way that your brain can determine that it's coming from an exterior source.
That is very scary because, if someone felt like they were targeted like that, a psychologist might say they're being delusional or suffering from hallucinations, but they could actually be being targeted.
Quite, and there has been cases of people who obviously claim that to happen, and in a lot of cases there seems to be a degree of evidence, certainly.
What about voice to skull technology? One thing I've always wondered about is a lot of murderers, serial killers, have said that the voices told them to do it. Could there be a case that they really are hearing voices that are being transmitted to them?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that was the Smirnoff patent was one particular thing it's now owned by SciTech, which is a CIA-funded organisation that was connected with people like Ingo Swann and John B. Alexander, who were vaguely connected with that Men Who Stare at Goats project. But they're also into remote viewing and that sort of thing. Apparently they own the patent to this thing called the Smirnoff device. And what it does is it works in a slightly different way, apparently. It uses sub-acoustics. So basically it's just like a recording, but you can't actually perceive it. You can't hear it, but your sort of oral nerve or cortex or whatever it is picks it up, and so it sounds like a voice that's coming from inside your head. And we know this to work because basically the FBI were going to use this on David Koresh during the Waco siege. They actually got Charlton Heston to record a series of a monologue pretending to be God, and they were going to put this voice into his head and tell him to tell him down his weapons and come out peacefully, or whatever, or surrender to whatever. But when they spoke to Igor Smirnoff, he couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't kill each other. The two that initially spring to mind with me are Mark Chapman, who didn't confess until we actually stayed in a trance, and then did not confess to the murder of John Lennon until prompted by a personal call from God. And then the other one would be Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who also apparently confessed after God told him to confess, and also admitted that he was on a mission from God to rid the world of prostitutes. And I'm sure there's also numerous other serial killers that I can't think of off the top of my head that felt that they were influenced by God. But certainly, particularly those two, is very interesting when you look at the cases, and combined with that confession, which is unusual, the sort of lack of professionalism and the gaps within those particular cases, regardless of whether you think those two people are guilty, not guilty, partially guilty, whatever, you certainly can't deny that there was degrees of unusualness and strange unprofessionalism on parts of the police in both of those cases.
Mark Chapman had a number of characters inside his head talking to him, didn't he? I think they actually had a meeting to discuss whether he should kill John Lennon at one point.
He had these little people living inside his head, apparently, and he was trying to make himself into the big person so that he could defeat these people. He was, deeply troubled person. That is entirely clear. What is the cause of this? It is the speculation, and there's a lot of suggestions that Mark Chapman was involved with various activities he was working for World Vision, which is a charitable organisation, but he just so happened to be in areas like, I think it was Beirut at the time that the CIA was there, and the CIA was using groups like this to funnel information, funds, espionage agents, that sort of thing.
And he had that book, Catcher in the Rye, didn't he? That was supposed to be a catalyst.
Yeah, apparently so. He felt that he identified with the character, but also he was, after he shot John, or allegedly shot John Lennon, Jose Padermo, the doorman, ran up to him and wrestled the gun off of him. Apparently, Jose Padermo, the gunman, who was a CIA agent that was involved in the Bay of Pigs, but he just so happened to be working as the doorman on that particular night, wrestled the gun off Mark Chapman, said, "You've just shot John Lennon," and then sort of detained him. And all the time he was apparently, he had a mysterious tape player as well, but this is that disappeared, and sometimes this is retold as like a radio or whatever. But yeah, the other thing was that he was sat reading The Catcher in the Rye. And John Hinckley, who was the failed assassin of Ronald Reagan, also had a copy of The Catcher in the Rye in his possession at the time, apparently. So a lot of people have suggested that it could well have been a trigger, in the sense of, have you ever seen the Manchurian Candidate film? How the is it Queen of Diamonds, playing card triggers him to go into a hypnotic trance where he can be sort of easily manipulated.
That's quite scary, actually, because I found I was telling a friend the other day, I found a card floating in the sea the other day. It was the Queen of Diamonds. And I wondered if it had some significance.
There is that bit where he jumps in the lake. Yeah. I'm talking about the original film, not the Denzel Washington one. Oh, it's not bad, but the original.
No, I saw it a long time ago. Moving on to another topic, you mentioned when you were talking to Art about the Syrian lesbian girl who you said was a fake and turned out to be a Scottish.
Yeah. Well, he was an American guy that was living in Scotland, and he was a CIA asset called Tom McMaster, apparently. And this was exposed because basically I think he was writing a blog through the Guardian newspaper. I could be mistaken about that, but I'm pretty sure it was the Guardian newspaper.
So was he working for someone then, do you think, or was this just something he did off his own back?
I mean, it would be a bit of a coincidence if this CIA agent just so happened to be, involved in a paper that has been suggested to be involved with, soft journalism in the past by other people. And it just so happened to particularly favour public opinion against Assad, who at the time we just so happened were trying to sort of oust with a quite gentle proxy war at that particular time. So, I've not seen his pay slip or anything, but it certainly is suspicious. And his wife as well was, she was involved in some sort of, I forget exactly, it was something to do with Syrian economics, and she was connected to some business that sort of rebuilds infrastructure. Again, I may have got a bit of that wrong, so we'll add allegedly after that. But she was certainly connected. She had some job or position whereby she would have also done quite well if we had to go in and rebuild Syria.
Yeah, it's suspicious. And there was that girl before the Iraq War who gave a false story of babies being killed in a hospital to help.
Yeah, she was the QAT ambassador's daughter, wasn't she? And that was basically Hilton and Knoll, who are a PR firm that have connections to the Tavistock Institute and various other psychological think tanks. And they're a very despicable public relations firm that it tends to sort of help people get into wars, can think of things like that, and defend terrible chemical companies, and also soften the image of sort of despotic figures. Whoever will do whatever you want if you pay them enough money. But I mean, it's quite despicable that such an agency would exist anyway. And public relations is essentially propaganda. Public relations was a term that was invented by Edward Bernays because he wanted to call it what it was, propaganda, but he was smart enough to realise that basically they just spent however many years talking about Soviet propaganda or Nazi propaganda or whatever, and so the word has got negative connotations. So they had to market a phrase in order to be able to sell you propaganda, and that phrase was public relations.
Do you know if there's any laws against doing any of this kind of stuff, to creating false stories to sway public opinion?
Yeah. Well, there is, of course, but A, you have to be caught. B, it has to be sort of followed up, and C, um, um, there are ways that you could get around it by clever use of language, or alleging, or protecting your sources and such like that. So yeah.
I mean, I sometimes wonder how far the governments would go. If you look in the alternative media, there's lots of talk about false flag incidents, and I look at it and I just think, how, which of these are true?
Well, who knows?
There's 9/11, there's the UK terrorist incidents on the Underground, Sandy Hook, the murder of the UK soldier Lee Rigby, the Paris attacks. I mean, how would you know if any of those were whether governments would stoop that low to actually create a story, or use actors? Do you think that would be possible? Do you think the government are capable? Is there any cases where they've been caught out actually using?
Well, I mean,
yes,
yeah, there's been lots of cases. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean, this. It's one of those. What's in that egg? Well, the last egg I saw was a crocodile. Ergo, all eggs contain crocodiles. It's not as straightforward as that. But of course, there's examples of governments instigating terror against their own citizens, or overthrowing their own government and such like that. As recently as the 70s, the Labour government in Australia was overthrown by MI6, the CIA, and elements of the Australian intelligence arm. And this was because they were going to close Pine Gap missile testing base. So there's lots of fingers in lots of pies, mixing it up in lots of different ways. You've got documents like Northwoods, or whatever it's called, which basically suggest techniques to create terror and stuff like that. You've got documents coming out of places like Tavistock that suggest the best way to control a nation or keep them malleable is to instigate external trauma and to blame an exterior person. So yeah, it's certainly possible. There was instances like Gladio, where NATO was basically paying far right groups to attack civilians, and blaming it on communist groups in order to further their particular economic and socio-economic ends. So yes, all of these things. It doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, that every single thing is a false flag. Or that every single thing has government's involvement. A lot of things. I mean, it's a complicated thing. Terror groups and such like that. People say stuff like, ISIS. They're the CIA. I'm sure they've had their hand in the creation of it and stuff like that, and various other intelligence agencies and stuff like that. But to a certain degree, once you've got an ideology going and such like that, you can sort of draw. It feeds itself. Do you know what I mean? So it's not as simple as that. There are a lot of people who think that they're genuinely sort of freedom fighters for their own particular religious cause or whatever, and would consider themselves to be ISIS. There's a lot of people that are knocking around America and wear blue and consider themselves to be Crips. They're not Crips, but they'll kill you just the same as other Crips. They've never met Tucky Williams or any of those people. They've never been sort of, officially sanctioned by anyone in Los Angeles, but they'll shoot you just the same.
Don't think I want to meet them then. How about in the political arena? I wondered whether there's fake incidents there. I remember there was a fainting woman that Obama appeared to catch without even seeing her fall. Could that have been staged?
Yeah, I mean, everything about political life is geared towards setting things up for a more favourable public relations message and such like that. So yeah, of course incidents can be set up. I mean, also politicians lie. They'll be set up for. I mean, every single time that you get a politician and he's taking his jacket off and he's sat there in a factory and he's rolled his sleeves up, it's a setup. It's all a setup.
Another one I wondered what you think about this was there was a viral Twitter photo of Cameron flying EasyJet, and a girl took a photo of him eating Pringles, which sort of he flies EasyJet. He's just like the rest.
He's one of us.
Yeah. Do you reckon that was a setup?
Probably. Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but it's certainly, if it wasn't a setup, it was brilliant for them, wasn't it? I mean, there was that whole thing about pasties that they all got involved in. They don't care about pasties, nor do they eat pasties, nor do they care about the sort of, in their terms, scum that would eat that sort of muck. But, you know, again, it's a way of connect with the electorate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like Obama got caught out lying about his uncle liberating Auschwitz. It was discovered. Well, no, he didn't. And it was the Russians who did that. And you know, so people lie to
Well,
make themselves look
Obama,
better.
I think
I mean,
Obama tells more lies than actually truth. So
well, I don't think Obama will probably have a terrible amount of saying what he says. To be quite honest, it's politics. This is the point. Like, you know, you're not there to initiate any sort of change or to actually, you know, do anything. You're there to give a favourable image to the public and keep a steady hand on the tiller while civil servants and the other people that actually run the country get on with it.
Another thing that you kind of alluded to on our art show was the demonization of some world leaders compared to others, you know, like Assad, Kim Jong-un. Are they really so different in some ways to, say, our own leader, Cameron? Some of the things they do are quite similar, really.
Well, of course they are, but again, it's not as straightforward as it. The world doesn't fall into good guys and bad guys, or black hats or white hats. It's about selective use of information and again, perception management and painting things. I won't want to live in North Korea. I probably won't want to live in Syria, to be quite honest, either. But does that justify murdering people? No, probably not. And part of propaganda is painting people in different ways, you know, in a way that basically seems justifiable for you to kill them. It's as straightforward as that. I mean, it's never straight, really, because, I mean, there's lots of things that say, you know, Iraq was better off under a Saddam Hussein, and to a certain degree that's probably true. It doesn't mean that Saddam Hussein was a monster, but he was a monster that we put in. It's very, very, very complicated. There is a danger with a lot of these things of breaking it down to as simple degrees of good and bad. There's enough evidence that pretty much anybody that's been prominent on the world stage, you could find enough instances to demonize them or to make them seem like a hero, depending on how you felt like framing them in those particular 4 sentences or whatever. But yeah, of course, I mean, it's part of the propaganda of foreign policy. That's the main thing. It's selective. I mean, you forgive murdering your own citizens in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and various other places. You condemn it in Syria, and again, not to say that murdering your own citizens is a terrible act, but again, it's that was what I was trying to get at, is the fact that it's certainly, it's not straightforward as that, is it? It's about what information is given to you, when and by who and why.
Yeah. And talking of murdering and killing, another thing you talked about was the ability to manipulate someone to kill, and how easy that could be. I mean, I recently saw a female Fox News anchor call for the death of US soldier Bergdahl.
Was it that one with the black hair? It looks like she looks like a mannequin.
I think I know the one you mean. I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure. They're all kind of the same ilk. A lot of them are. But basically, she seems like quite a nice, friendly, intelligent, almost intelligent woman. But
she's incredibly intelligent, but you know, she's playing a part, isn't she? Well, she might just be intelligent and be a monster as well. But yeah.
It seems like people can be manipulated to want someone killed really easily, basically.
Oh yeah, I mean, everyone was quite happy. Would be quite happy to see someone like Gary Glitter like strung up or whatever.
I don't know though. I mean, personally, I think it's terrible what he's done.
Channel 4 that was well, I'm talking about the sort of general consensus. There was that documentary on Channel 4, the reimagining of the trial and execution of Gary Glitter, and it was incredibly popular. Is all I'm saying. I'm not a favour of the death penalty. I'm sure there's been instances when I've gone, I want to kill that person or whatever, and I'm sure you could be manipulated into wanting some people dead. Whether you could continue that justification after the fact has happened, after the mist is settled or whatever, would be a different sort of argument. But again, it's not about this is the point about a lot of sort of rhetoric and propaganda and stuff like that. We don't want to think about what's going to happen next. We want simple choices. We want black and white choices. Do you want this person dead or not? Well, I mean, I don't know. We don't do yes or no immediately. Come on. And bear in mind that if you say no, you're on their side. So that's the point of it. Can you manipulate people to kill? Of course you can manipulate people to kill. People kill each other.
Well, Charles Manson managed to convince his followers to kill the.
I don't know about that. I have a different opinion on them.
Really?
Charles Manson.
What's your opinion on that?
I don't think he manipulated them to kill at all. I think Tex went there to get a load of drugs and ended up killing them because his robbery went wrong. And I think Manson was a convenient scapegoat rather than exploiting the connections to Warner Brothers Studio and the mafia. I think he's a despicable person. I think he's guilty of accessory to murder. I think he's guilty of rape, and I think he's guilty of pimping and drug dealing and drug distribution and moving underage girls across state line and various other things. But I think that in that particular case, the concept of and all the connections to cults and stuff like that, I think it was just the way of the prosecution manufacturing a case where a lot of the evidence was initially destroyed. And then afterwards, I think it was used by various elements to sort of demonize the anti-war movement, connect them to the hippie movement and free love and peace movement and stuff like that. But I don't think it was intended for that. I think they just made lemonade afterwards.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention was that the title of your book, Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, made me think of one of the topics we've covered on another episode, which was free will. People such as Sam Harris say that perhaps we don't author our own thoughts at all. There's been experiments to show that thoughts come without decision making and that free will doesn't actually exist. I wondered if you'd looked into that at all.
Not really, to be honest. No, sorry, you just reminded me of a joke. On David Baddiel's stand-up, he says he was doing a pub quiz, and he's always very good at pub quizzes on the fruit machine until the last question came up and said, assuming that God is infinite, there can be no such thing as being. Discuss. And it's easiest 20 quid he's ever won. But I don't really know about that. I mean, we could be here all day. Where is the mind? What is the mind? These are things that I don't think people know. It'd be interesting perhaps people don't have free will. Perhaps there's predestiny. Sam Harris, is Sam Harris the evangelist?
No, he's the opposite. He's the atheist.
Oh, right. Oh, how stupid of me. Sorry. Right. Well, I wondered.
He's quite evangelical about it.
Well, I just wondered, if who knows? Who knows? I really don't know that, to be quite honest.
Let me just move on to one of my last points that I wanted to discuss. It's a pet topic of mine, really, the royal family. I mean, and monarchy in general. Here in Thailand, the image of the king is carefully controlled, and it's illegal to criticise him. So I certainly won't be doing that just right now. People are being disappeared and imprisoned regularly, and there's a propaganda video that's shown before every cinema movie here, and you're expected to stand, and if you don't, you'll be exposed and could be in trouble. But if you look at the Queen's speech this year, I noticed similarities in the perception management of the royals, and I wonder if you looked into Clarence House and royal propaganda and what goes on there.
Well, not specifically, but only from sort of just my own observation at the minute. We've got the new Diana or whatever, Kate Middleton or whatever, who they're desperately trying to pretend it's just some. They sold that whole thing as like anyone can be a princess. She was just some girl that he met at school and spotted from across the things. No, she's not. She's related to the goldsmiths stuff, which is vital if you're going to continue a lineage, which is basically what the aristocracy is about. Occasionally you'll hear a story of William rescuing some girl from the sea. Or Harry murdering some shepherd or something like that, and it's like I very much doubt any of them are true.
Well, they also campaign for wildlife and stuff, despite sort of being sort of fairly keen hunters as well.
Yeah, exactly. So again, this is about sort of perception management and such like that. One thing that it always amuses me is when they keep pointing out, "Oh, Kate's wearing the same dress. She's worn that dress like 6 times. She's so thrifty." Like,
Yeah.
are you mental? Are you mental? Like, are you absolutely mad? Like,
But
if
the
anything,
other thing they do is they quite often in articles in the UK point out how expensive everything's they're wearing. Like, let's indulge in how expensive everything is, and it just amazes me that people still support them. But
well,
people seem to like to be able to see that image of something that they can never achieve, really.
well, absolutely. And you could make the same argument for sort of, things that make America great, or things that make Australia proud, sporting prowess, anything. It's a way of vicariously living through something else. It's attaching yourself to something bigger than yourself, and riding on its coattails to a certain degree. If you take some pride in that, even though technically it's really nothing to do with you, but a lot of people do. A lot of people take a lot of, it depends, and I'm going to make a broad statement here, because this won't obviously apply to everyone, but certain people, their love of royalty and the continuation of the monarchy lets them know that the world is a certain way, and it lets them know their position in that world, and it lets them know what's a good person, what's a bad person, what's up, what's down, and essentially it would be called ego bolstering, or psychological maintenance, I suppose, or something like that. And people just like it. Like, there's a lot of people where I work who are very, very keen royalists, and a lot of people that think of Margaret Thatcher as being a very, very great person, and no amount of evidence of complicity in genocide or paedophilia would sway them the other way. But again, it's about how people use information, and that, I think, is one of the sort of main degrees of what you would call mind control. This is an understanding about how people might use information. So when you are presenting it to people, you can gauge your response. You can gauge an expectation of how people are going to, not everybody, but a certain amount of people, how they might react to that information, and therefore you can influence their behaviour.
Yeah, just to wrap up, talking about influence and behaviour and people's opinions. I heard on another show, and I think you alluded to on Art's show as well, about how people get fixed on an opinion or an idea and defend it to the death without sort of keeping an open mind. And I think that was good advice, really, that people should keep an open mind, and perhaps a good way to end this chat as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is. I mean, I think that one of the main problems about social media and the internet, and sort of the immediacy of the information, the public forum in which information is disseminated, and the decision that you have to make very, very, very quickly whether you're in on this or you're not on this. I think that exacerbates it, and I think it's not always people's fault. I think, but once you're part of a group, it's kind of like joining a cult, right? Okay, once you joined a cult, or once you've seen an aspect of it that you like, you have to throw yourself into it, because otherwise they won't accept you. And once you're in it, basically anybody that argues against your position, all that does is bolster your reassurance that you made the right decision, because they told you they would say this. Do you know what I mean? And it's about how people are using this information. And I think a lot of the time people are using it to make an understanding of the world, or to bolster their ego, or to make themselves feel cleverer than other people. I figured this out first. I'm so much better than you. They're not going to easily take criticism, and that's it's dangerous.
Yeah, I wanted to talk more about cults. We've done episodes on cults ourselves, but we'll have to leave that till next time. I wanted to.
Well, I'd be delighted to come back anytime you want, man.
Great, excellent. Well, I'm definitely going to give you a call then. Now, I wanted to talk more about ISIS, Operation Gladio, Tavistock Institute, the music industry, amnesic barriers, patriotism, disinfo agents, Jimmy Savile, and lots of other topics. But yeah, I'll give you a call, and we'll have another chat soon.
Excellent.
Thanks for coming, Neil. And your website I believe is www.neilsaundersmindcontrol.com. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Is that where people can go to find out about books, etc.?
Yeah, the books are available on there. They're also available on Kindle, so you can get that through Amazon. The best you can message me through the website, or you can message me through Facebook, which I'm not on it, but I'll check my messages and stuff like that. So
great, I'll definitely be in contact soon. Thanks very much for joining us, Neil. It's been great chatting.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
So let me know what you think about some of the things we've spoken about today and in previous episodes as well. You can leave comments in the chat room at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. You'll also find a voicemail there. You can leave a comment and we'll put it on the next show and we'll respond to your comments. Our voicemail is a kind of our phone-in substitute. You can suggest new topics there and also guests, and we'll do our best to try and get them on. You can also find us on YouTube. Just type in Truth Sentinel with Scott and you should find 2 channels come up. Subscribe to them both. We've also teamed up with trutht-shirts.com. That's trutht-shirts.com. They do conspiracy type t-shirts and truth type t-shirts, and they're all very reasonably priced, under $20. They can customize t-shirts for you as well, and hoodies. If you use the code TRUTH1, that's TRUTH1, that's a special discount for Truth Sentinel listeners. You get the discount, 10% discount, and we get a small donation, so it could help fund our channel as well. So thanks very much for listening, and speak to you again soon.